Feels like it's been ages.
Hello everyone, Lord here. Welcome back to Shadowverse. Today we're going to be talking about the upcoming Omen of the Ten expansion pack. With the launch date fast approaching and a lot being able to be said about this set, I've decided to forego my usual full-on set review and just give you my personal shorthand list of the top 10 upcoming cards. This isn't necessarily a list of the most earth-shatteringly powerful cards, but rather it's a list of the cards I personally view as most efficient, most likely to see play, or just flat out most interesting in regards to their potential impact on the game. In other words, these are what I believe will be some of the highlights of the set. So let's dive straight in. And just as a note, these aren't sorted in any particular order. Starting off, we have Prophetess of Creation. A little bit of trivia for you. This is actually Cygame's censored version of Moses, in the same way that Prince of Darkness is their censored version of Satan. But what's more interesting here is the effect. There's a lot of text and a lot of numbers here, so there's a lot to talk about. However, I'm going to summarize why she is on this list in 3 main points. Number 1, she is a very obvious build-around card, which is obviously going to create a new archetype around herself. Number 2, she is in many ways very similar to Wordwilder Ginger, which was a successful archetype in this very craft. And number 3, she has innate synergy with the craft's mechanic, which is Spell Boost. So between those 3 points, creating a new archetype for the somewhat stagnant runecraft, having a very similar kind of playstyle and win condition to Wordwilder Ginger, that is presenting a hard to answer, in this case unanswerable board, and working innately with Spell Boost, and that means that Spell Boost cards actually activate her effect, so a Flame Destroyer, which was reduced to 0, will actually count as a 10 play point card for her effect. I think that Prophetess of Creation is going to create some waves, especially in the first 2 weeks of the expansion. Even if her archetype ends up not being good later on in the expansion, it is very possible that she will get additional support in the mini expansion or next expansion or the expansion after that and so on. Remember that it took quite a while for Wordwilder Ginger to become good, but when it was good, it was good. And this card looks a lot less memey than Wordwilder Ginger. Next up, we have Kayron, Stygian Fairy Woman. And yes, I know somebody's gonna get on me about the name, I don't know, okay? This card doesn't need a lot of explanation. This is a very obvious tempo bomb. This card is on this list because it is extremely powerful and it is very obviously powerful. 6 play point 5/5, she loses almost nothing for having the effect. She gives you a very targeted draw which you can manipulate with deck building, and to top it all off, when she evolves, she just makes whatever you drew, or whatever you want, but most commonly whatever you drew, completely free, so you can have an absolutely crazy tempo swing the turn you evolve this card. There's really not much to say. I expect to see this card in pretty much every Shadow deck come next expansion. Next up, we have City of Gold. This is very clearly a power-crept Candelabra of Prayer that not only costs less and provides the same effect, but also draws itself from your deck. Now, some Havencraft decks have had problems with board space, and this is one of kind of the reasons I would see from not playing this card, but if board space is not really an issue, I see no reason for every Havencraft deck not to run 1 copy of this card. It acts as deck thinning, it places itself into play when you have leftover mana, it reduces countdown by 1 on amulets, which is absolutely phenomenal, even though there are fewer amulets these days than in the past. I just think that this card is great and will definitely see play unless board space is a very real issue. Next up, we have Apostle of Truth. This, again, is a card which is very clearly powerful. It is on this list because it just increases the consistency of an existing archetype by an extreme amount. Obviously, this card slots into Spell Boost Rune, or Giant Chimera Rune if you prefer, which is the current flavor of Spell Boost Rune, if you will. But this card allows you to trade your over-boosted cheap cards like Wind Blast and so forth for potentially a over-boosted win condition like Giant Chimera or a free Flame Destroyer or so forth. It's taken no hit on its stats, it costs almost nothing, there's very little opportunity cost, it filters your deck, it increases consistency, there's just almost nothing bad to say about this card. I think that this card is definitely going as a 2 for 3 of in all Giant Chimera decks, unless they are very, very short for spots, and I do not think they are. Not for this power level. Next up, we have a Humble Bronze, Whispering Woods. So this card is on here because of efficiency. It is a card which for 2 play points both makes an enemy follower unable to attack for 1 turn, which is not an effect which I would pay 2 for. However, it also draws you a Forcecraft follower at the end of your turn. And this can be made even more efficient by enhancing it and drawing up to 3 cards over 3 turns for 4 play points. In general, there's not much complexity to this card. I just think it is extremely efficient. Actually, stopping an enemy follower's attack, I think, is an effect which has often been undervalued in the past, but mainly because the cards which had that effect had only that effect, or it was random, or it was dependent on something. This card just lets you choose whatever you want, and also draws you cards. And it's an amulet, and it's cheap, and it's decent late game. So is it going to see play? I think so. Next up, Omen, Knight of Mysteria. We have another cheap bronze card. Again, this card is on here because of efficiency. I think that this card increases the consistency of at least 2 Runecraft archetypes. It itself is a Mysteria card, which immediately adds to the Mysteria archetype because it's also a decent Mysteria card. And it is just a 2 play point follower which draws another card. So 2 play points, 1/2 Mysteria draw card is already good. This guy draws you a targeted card, a Mysteria card. So I think that he's just phenomenal. He could also be the building block to a burn deck which only plays Mysteria Magic Founder and him. And I think that will actually be a quite viable strategy, as a lot of the burn effects become exponentially more powerful if you manage to land them on 5. And this guy basically doubles your chances of being able to make that play. So I think overall he's phenomenal, and every Mysteria deck is going to be burning him, and also he has the potential of being in other decks. So he gets a spot on this list. Next up, we have Hydro Alchemist, another bronze, just kind of good stuff card that adds to an archetype. It's actually very common that consistency makes or breaks a lot of archetypes, and the last couple bronze cards we've gone over have just been cards which add consistency, and this is no exception. This is a card which supports the artifact archetype more than the puppet archetype, although I could see an argument made for both. Guard Form Golem and Strike Form Golem, if you may remember, they are currently only made by Paracelsus. They are a 3/3 ward and a 3/3 rush follower, respectively, and they can become a bit bigger if you enhance them. But the main point is this is a card which gives you good artifacts in your deck, which you want to play. They are not one of the 4 basic artifact types. They are not random, and this card also enables or keeps you in resonance. And she's lost no stats to get this effect. So again, just adds consistency, is a good card. There's nothing bad about it, and I think it's going to be a 3th edition artifact Portalcraft if they manage to claw back their spot from the currently reigning puppets. Next up, Usurping Spineblade. This is again a very good stuff card. Swordcraft, 2 play points, deal 3 to an enemy follower. That's already pretty decent. It also gives you one of the new Gilded cards. So obviously there's some that you want more than others, but all the Gilded cards are decent at least. So I think that this again is just a very good value proposition. Paying 2 play points to deal 3 to an enemy follower and then getting a 1 play point card which can do a variety of things is pretty good. And the value only increases if you're also playing cards which synergize with this. There's a couple of cards which have an additional effect when you play a Gilded card. So if you play those, this just becomes exponentially more powerful. But even by itself, I think it's good enough to see play. Realm of Repose, another innocent looking bronze. So I think this is going to be quite controversial, but I actually think this card is crazy. I think that this card enables a playstyle for Havencraft, which is going to be not only extremely annoying to play against, but also extremely difficult to counter. Acts as a semi-counter already to instant win condition cards like the Prophets of Creation we viewed earlier, and also Giant Chimera, because it gives you a Durando effect, which is, you can't take more than 3 damage at a time. But it also allows you to protect your Havencraft followers from attacks, so they can only be dealt with by spells. And this is an effect we saw in the previous expansion in the form of Petra, and we've kind of seen the power of being able to keep your followers on the board at full health, not threatened by other followers. So I think a effect which gives this to your entire board, and you can keep building on top of that board by just not attacking, I think is very powerful and will allow for some very annoying decks. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I think that this card is going to spawn some really annoying things. And finally, we have Sinister Sarcophagus. There's not much to say here. This is just a great value proposition. We have a 4 play point 2/2, which reanimates for 2. So most Shadowcraft followers for 2 play points are 2/2s with an effect. So you are basically getting 4/4 worth of stats plus an effect at the worst. What is really great about this card though is its evolve. So when you evolve it, it gains stats, which is unusual for a card with a good evolve effect, but it gains stats, it becomes a 3/3, it summons 3 ghosts, and it still keeps its reanimate effect. So basically, for 4 play points and an evolution point, you get a 3/3 rush, 3 1/1 storms, and the additional reanimate effect when it dies, which I think is just a phenomenal value proposition. I think this card is definitely going to see play, again, if Shadow doesn't somehow stop playing tempo, which I do not think they will. And I think that this will be their go-to 4 play point evolve card. So if they're playing second, I think this is the card that they're going to want to see to kind of take over the board on turn 4. And that's my top 10 list. But I mentioned that this set is quite expansive in terms of what it adds and what could be considered worth discussing. So in honor of this expansion actually having a larger selection of interesting cards, here's another 10 entries in the form of my honorable mentions list. I'm going to very quickly go over these. So we have Rulenai, Omen of Silence. This is not necessarily a super powerful card, but a very interesting effect to see in Shadowverse. Obviously some other games have experimented with this, and it's interesting to see if it'll have any kind of impact on Shadowverse. Next up, Destructive Refrain. This is not necessarily a super bombastic card, however, I find it very interesting simply because it is a potential one-sided board wipe. And even though it may not look very efficient, I mean, one-sided board wipes, they tend to pull one over on you, so I think you should watch this card. Apostle of Usurpation. This is one of those cards I mentioned that works with guild cards. So this guy is pretty much all value, deals 1 damage to an enemy, gives you a card. That card can deal 2 extra damage to a random enemy follower. Overall, this guy's an amazing value proposition. My main problem with him is I think Swordcraft has far too many mid-game cards they want to play, so I don't think there's a spot for this guy. But if Swordcraft is looking for mid-game cards, I think this guy should be at the top of their list. I think he's very impactful. Apostle of Craving and Craving Splendor. I'm actually giving both these cards the same spot because they basically do the same thing, or rather I'm featuring them for the same reason, which is that this effect that they provide can be used both offensively and defensively. That is to say, you can both buff your own follower and buff the opponent's follower to get the secondary effect to kind of screw them over. So I'm not sure if these are good enough to see play. However, I'm very interested to see if that flexibility will earn them a slot. Next up, Disciple of Destruction. Nothing super flashy about this card. I just think it's a very easy additional card draw engine for Portalcraft, and with access to cheap fodder like puppets, I think that this guy is probably going to make puppet decks if they remain a thing in the meta. I'll be very surprised not to see this guy seeing play in some deck. Unicorn Knight, again, value proposition here. 2 play points, 1/3 is great stats for Havencraft. They have access to Summit Temple, and in general, they like kind of beef your creatures on the toughness side. It's an anti-aggro tool. It gives you a card, and even though the Unicorn might not be great, the Unicorn Spear is a removal card, which also heals you, so innate synergy with a bunch of Havencraft's cards, so a great value proposition in general. Its only problem is it's a bit slow because the Spear also costs quite a bit of mana, but if Havencraft can afford to play this kind of slower game, I think this is a great value proposition. Aloadai, I'm not sure if that's how this is supposed to be pronounced, but this is basically the same thing as Unicorn Knight. This is a great value proposition. 4 play point, 3/3 gives you either removal or a free evolution for 2 play points. I think that this, again, is just a great value proposition that will see play if the meta is somewhat slower and crafts can afford to play these kind of investment cards, where the turn you play the card, it doesn't do a lot, but you're kind of investing into future turns by generating these very efficient cards that come from these followers. Next up, we have Sword Serpent Guardian. So again, very innocuous card. 4 play points, summons a 2/2 and 2 1/1s, serpents. The more interesting part of this card is actually when she's played as an Enhance 8, because the 2 1/1s you summon get Bane and Rush. Well, also other serpents get Bane and Rush, but most often you will have just the 2 serpents she makes. And I think that this would be a great removal for big guys and late game. I'm not sure if she can justify the cost of 8 Perhaps you'd need some serpents beforehand to get more value, but I think that this is a very interesting approach to follower-based removal. Next up, Servant of Lust. So this guy is actually an overstated Bloodcraft follower. He has somewhat of a drawback, so dealing 1 damage to your leader is actually not the drawback. It's what Bloodcraft wants to do with all the self-damage mechanics they've been getting recently. So the drawback is that when he attacks the enemy leader, he's basically only dealing 2 damage. But that's actually fine because he's also healing you for 2. So in general, this card just... there doesn't seem to be anything bad about it. I'm not sure if the Bloodcraft self-damage archetype is going to be super viable, but if it is, I see no reason not to run this card. It just seems great. And finally, we have Servant of Repose, which is Havencraft Servant. Again, not much to say. Great value proposition here. 3 play points, 1/4, great stats for Havencraft, great stats for Summit especially. It gives you repeatable healing effect, which is great for Tenko Shrine. It's great for any Haven deck, basically. Everybody loves healing. And she also has the flexibility to be a late game ward with some pretty good stats. 4/7, that's going to deal with most things. So I think that this card just wins out, again, on value proposition and on flexibility. Being able to be a ward, having to be killed because she repeatedly heals, and just also being a good anti-aggro card by being dropped early with that high toughness. In general, great card. And with that, we conclude my list of personal card highlights from Omen of the 10. So, are you looking forward to the set? What are your favorite cards, and did I feature them or did I miss them? Let me know in the comments. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Lord, and this has been Shadowverse. Thanks for watching.